All right, everyone, get ready for today's deep dive. This story we're about to explore is, well, it's a roller coaster. We're talking about heartbreak, betrayal, and the kind of consequences that honestly could spiral out of control for anyone.
Yeah, it really makes you think, like, how one seemingly small decision can set off this massive chain reaction,
Right.
affecting not just the people involved, but their families, their jobs, even their
It's
health.
like a ripple effect, one stone thrown into the water.
Right, exactly. And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating, so relevant. So we're diving into Tim's story. Now, at first glance, Tim seems like, well, he's got it all. Loving wife, steady career, the whole picture.
The American dream.
Yeah, exactly. But what's interesting is the source material we have, it doesn't present Candy, Tim's wife, as this like evil villain from the start.
There's more to the story, right?
Yeah.
Like, there's some underlying
Yeah,
context.
there is. We see hints of her like growing dissatisfaction. Maybe she's longing for something more than what she has with Tim. And I think this is where you, the listener, might start thinking about those subtle signs of dissatisfaction.
The things we sometimes miss in our own relationships.
Exactly. Because we're all caught up in our own routines, our assumptions, our daily lives.
We get complacent.
Right. And Tim, being the devoted husband he is, tries to give Candy space. Like when she starts acting distant, he just figures she's stressed from her studies. But then things take this turn during a camping trip with his boss, Jake.
Oh boy, the boss is involved.
Well, yeah, that's where things get even more complicated.
Complicated how? Give me the details.
Okay, so picture this. They're on this camping trip, and Tim stumbles upon a clue. A pair of Candy's underwear, but with a scent that is very clearly not his.
Uh-oh. I'm sensing trouble.
Yeah, and guess whose cologne Tim recognizes?
You're going to tell me it's the boss's, aren't you?
It is the boss's cologne, Jake.
Oof. This is messy. A recipe for disaster.
It is. It is. Tim's intuition is like blaring alarm bells at this point. He knows something's deeply wrong. So he decides to talk to a family lawyer, Ruby Hawkins, to, well, explore his options.
Okay, so he's not just reacting emotionally, he's being smart about it, thinking ahead.
Right, and Ruby's advice is crucial here. She tells Tim, look, if you're going to pursue any kind of legal action, especially in a case like this, you need rock-solid evidence.
Evidence of infidelity. It's got to be concrete.
Absolutely, and that sets Tim on a path he never in a million years thought he'd be on.
So what does he do? March right up to Candy and demand answers.
Not quite. He's torn, right. He's dealing with this immense hurt, but he needs the truth. So he makes a difficult decision. He hires a private investigator, a guy named Marvin Johnson.
Wow, a PI. That's serious.
It is, and it brings up an interesting question for the listeners out there. Is it ever okay to invade someone's privacy even if you think they're betraying you? It's a real moral gray area.
It is, yeah. But in Tim's case, he felt he had to protect himself.
Right. He needed proof. He needed to know for sure.
So what does the PI find? Does it confirm Tim's suspicions about Jake?
Oh, it's even worse than he could have imagined. So Tim goes on a business trip. And while he's away, Candy tells him, oh, I'm just waitressing at this party Jake's throwing. Seems harmless enough.
Yeah, sounds innocent. People need to work.
Exactly. But the PI sends Tim some photos that completely shatter his world. Candy's not just serving drinks. She's in bed with multiple men.
Multiple men.
Including Jake, and get this, Jake's son, Mike.
Oh my God, his boss and his boss's son. The betrayal. Wow.
It's just devastating. It's not just one instance, it's a pattern, a web of deceit.
Wow.
And it involves people Tim considered close.
This is like a Greek tragedy unfolding.
And here's where the story takes an interesting turn. Instead of flying back home, confronting Candy, Tim decides to play the long game.
Really? He doesn't just lose it.
Nope. He finishes his business trip, goes back home, and acts like everything's normal.
Okay, so there's a plan brewing.
Oh, yeah. But behind that facade, he's carefully plotting his next move.
He's going from heartbroken to strategic.
Right. He knows he needs to protect himself, legally and emotionally. So he starts gathering evidence, getting ready for a divorce. He even accepts a job offer from a rival company, Empire.
Wow, he switched jobs too.
Yep. He's cutting ties, putting distance between himself and Jake and his messy web of betrayal.
He's taking his life back.
Absolutely. And, this is where I think the story starts resonating with so many people. Tim's not just wallowing in his pain, he's using it. He's turning this horrible experience into fuel for a comeback. But it's not all about revenge either. He also starts going to counseling sessions with Rose.
Rose, who's Rose?
She's the wife of his new boss, John Carlson.
So he's getting professional help processing everything.
Yeah. And I think that's so important for people to remember. Even in the midst of chaos, self-care matters. Tim's actively choosing to heal, to rebuild.
It's inspiring, honestly. But what about Candy?
Well, Candy's world is about to be turned upside down.
Okay, I need the details. What happens?
Well, that's a story for part 2 of our depth dive. Stay tuned, because this is just the beginning.
So, last we left off, Tim was about to drop the truth bomb on Candy and surf her with divorce papers. I can't imagine that went well.
It didn't. Candy's world just completely implodes.
I bet.
Yeah, she pleads with Tim, begs him to reconsider, even suggests counseling.
Trying to salvage things.
But Tim's made up his mind. He's done.
He's reached his breaking point.
He has. And it's interesting, we often hear about the betrayed partner's pain, but what about the cheater? What's going through their mind?
Yeah, what are they feeling?
I think this story gives us a glimpse into that. Candy's not just freaking out about the divorce. It's like she's suddenly realizing the magnitude of what she's done. She's lost her husband, her home, her sense of security.
It's like a rug being pulled out from under you.
Exactly. And to make matters worse, Jake, the guy she threw it all away for, he basically abandons her, tells her to deal with it herself.
No kidding. What a jerk.
Right. He shows his true colors, so Candy's left alone to face the music. And that's when we see this shifting her. The confident, carefree woman we saw earlier, gone. She's scared, vulnerable, desperate.
The consequences are hitting home.
Hard. And it's a reminder, it's easy to get caught up in the excitement of an affair, but there are always consequences.
Always.
And they often reach way beyond the people directly involved. Like, in this case, Tim decides to sue Jake for alienation of affection. And that sets off a chain reaction. Jake ends up losing his job, clients, his reputation.
Wow, so it's not just a marriage falling apart, it's careers, finances, everything.
It's a total mess, and it highlights how interconnected our lives are, how one person's choices can have this ripple effect, touching so many others.
Absolutely. But what about Tim? Is he consumed by anger and revenge? Or is he finding a way to move on?
Well, Tim's story actually takes a more positive turn. He really throws himself into his new job at Empire, and he seems to find it fulfilling. He keeps up with his counseling sessions with Rose, even takes up martial arts.
So he's channeling his energy into something positive.
He is. It's like he's not letting this betrayal define him. He's taking control of his life, focusing on his well-being.
I like that. Taking charge. But hold on, what about Candy's parents? Bernice and George, they must be completely in the dark about all this.
You're right. They reach out to Tim, wanting to get Candy's stuff. Think it's just a little spat, maybe a falling out with his boss. They have no clue about the affair, about any of it.
Oh man, I can't imagine the shock they're in for.
Tim decides to show them everything. The photos, the videos, the whole truth.
That must have been a really tough decision.
It was. But he felt they deserved to know. And for Candy's parents, it's devastating. Their whole image of their daughter is shattered. They're dealing with disappointment, anger, this deep sense of loss.
It really shows how infidelity ripples outward, affecting entire families. It's not just the couple, it's everyone around them.
Exactly. It can fracture relationships, create this web of hurt that's really hard to untangle. And in this story, the consequences, they get even more serious. As the divorce moves forward, Candy gets some news.
Don't tell me she's pregnant.
No, it's something else. She's diagnosed with HIV.
Whoa. Okay, that changes things. This just got real.
It does. And it's a stark reminder, right? Sometimes our actions have unintended consequences that can affect our health, our future.
Absolutely. So where does this leave Candy? I mean, she's lost her husband, her support system, and now this.
She turns to Tim.
What? Really? She asked for his help.
She does. And despite everything, Tim agrees to meet with her.
After all she put him through, that's incredible.
It shows his capacity for compassion. He sees that Candy's vulnerable, that she needs someone.
He's not holding on to the anger.
No. And it's important to remember forgiveness doesn't mean condoning what happened. It's about freeing yourself. Letting go of that bitterness. Exactly. And for Candy, it's a bittersweet moment. She's relieved to have Tim's forgiveness, but she's also heartbroken knowing it's truly over.
So does she tell Jake about her diagnosis?
She does. And that, unfortunately, is what sets off the final tragic events of this story. But we'll dive into that in the final part of our deep dive.
We're back. And, well, things took a dark turn. Candy's been diagnosed with HIV, and she's reached out to Tim for support. What happened next?
It's a really heavy moment in the story,
Mhm.
because both Tim and Candy, they have to face the weight of their past choices and the fact that, well, life is fragile.
Absolutely. So tell me about that meeting. What was it like?
So Tim goes to see Candy at her parents' house, and he's stunned by how she looks.
Oh, so
She's just frail, weak, a shadow of her former self, like the diagnosis, the emotional fallout. It's taken a toll.
you can imagine. It's like everything's catching up with her.
Yeah. And during their conversation, Candy just breaks down, apologizes to Tim over and over, acknowledges the pain she caused, says she regrets everything.
Do you think she's sincere? Or is it just, fear and desperation talking?
It's tough to say. And honestly, I think that's something for the listener to decide. Like, is there a point where forgiveness is possible? Even after such a huge betrayal, can people truly change?
Big questions.
Yeah.
I bet those were running through Tim's mind, too.
Oh, absolutely. But here's the thing. Tim's done the work. He's gone to therapy, processed his anger. He's reached this place of, if not forgiveness, then at least acceptance.
So he's able to see past the hurt,
Hmm.
see Candy as a person.
Exactly. He tells her he hopes she finds peace, happiness in the future, but he's clear he's moved on. There's no going back.
It's over.
It is. But there's still kindness there, compassion.
A powerful moment. He could have easily been bitter, but he chooses to let go.
He does. And for Candy, it's bittersweet. She's relieved to have his forgiveness, but also heartbroken. Because it's final.
So she tells Jake about the diagnosis, right?
She does. And, well, it triggers this horrible chain of events. Jake's already lost everything, his job, his reputation. Now this. He's consumed by anger, despair.
What happens?
He murders Candy and his son Mike. And then he takes his own life.
Oh my God, that's just awful.
It's a tragedy, and it really underscores how destructive secrets and betrayal can be. Jake, he couldn't cope. He didn't seek help, didn't take responsibility. He chose violence.
I can't imagine what Candy's parents went through, losing their daughter, their grandson, like that. What about Tim? How does he handle this news?
It's a shock, of course. Even though he and Candy were separated, there were still feelings there. Shared history. He goes to the memorial service, pays his respects, acknowledges the complexity of it all.
That says a lot about him. He could have just walked away, but he chooses to be there.
It shows empathy, a willingness to face those tough emotions. And as time passes, Tim starts to rebuild his life, finds comfort in his work, his friendships, the tools he's learned.
There's hope there.
Yeah.
Light at the end of the tunnel.
Right. And it's not about erasing the past, but about learning from it, growing through it, choosing hope.
Powerful stuff. As we come to the surface from this deep dive, I'm struck by Tim's resilience. It's a reminder that no matter what we face, there's always a way forward, a way to heal, to choose hope.
Absolutely. And that's the takeaway here, isn't it? Even in the darkest of times, there's a way back to the light. And even in the deepest dives, listeners, remember, there's always a way to resurface.